not telling in those scenes. Yeah.
There's one other that goes on because I think the part two feels like to me, and I want to ask you about this, that it's almost the way that as an actor you're constantly how you deal with that judgment and make it work to your advantage is the way that you think that it's not doing you. The idea of assessing somebody based on the way they look and act and how wrong that is.
I love exploring that. I love the idea that there's more under the surface because that's the case for everybody. And something that was important to me to do in this movie is that there really all are no small parts in this movie at all, even tiny minor characters who have one or two lines. I wanted to make sure that the things that they were talking about, the things that they cared about, the things that they said were not expected and were different, and they had other qualities about them that you may not have expected in a teen movie, and that makes me really happy as a viewer and as the director. But like, I just love, and as an actor, I love the idea of like the small little roles having meat to them because that's what I feel is like in the real world.
And those two that give us that imagination and the anxiety that these characters are going as the movie goes on. But as I was watching, I thought about something I said to you when I met you, and it's like a really subtextual thing playing a part in this, is that people don't quite know what to make of her. And you really kind of worry about how much of yourself you feel even as an actor. And just seeing the way these two young women deal with the fact that these judgments are being made about them and people are being to make of them is really a big part of the story.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something we all deal with, right? Especially as a teenager, you're figuring out what your place is in the world. And for me, I mean, my whole family are Cuban refugees, and I was the first person born in the United States. And so they couldn't really tell me what to expect or what to be like or how to get by in this new world because they were figuring it out on their own and their perspective was completely different. And I think that's something that a lot of children of immigrants share that for me, my point of view into the world, the way that I was like, okay, how do I figure this out was TV and movies. And that made me get a lot of things wrong and a lot of things right. I mean, in my personal career, I think there was a lot of code switching that I just inherently did in order to get a job or to be accepted by this like comedy world or comedy world that I knew I had to say things or that's my dog. Say things or deliver jokes or understand a certain type of comedy that wasn't inherent to where I came from. But because I watched so much TV, I knew what they wanted, and I was able to do it through just like the code switching that happens naturally in order to get by in the world. And that wasn't really something I realized I was doing until somewhere around last year, where I was like, I really need to take a look at like how much whitewashing I've done to myself because I felt like that's what I needed to be successful. I couldn't be too Latina or too different or too whatever. And the more I've grown in my career and the more I've grown in my life, the more I've allowed myself to not care about those things. And the more I realized that actually being who you are is the coolest thing you can be. But it certainly was a big part of like, I was like, well, that's the key to success. Why would I do it any other way, right? And that was because I was observant and I was scrappy, and it was the key to success in that moment. And I'm happy that I get to be sometimes the role of director now, where I can give people shots that don't necessarily depend on them doing the thing that's expected, but them doing something fresh and new and something that speaks to them and their culture.
It's true. That realized and her dog. That's the rest of it is. It's playing video. One of the things I know is in the film too that I think really gives us some texture is what their homes are like. And even though there's celebration of moving at home, is that it sort of deals with life and this idea that she knows where she stands, even though she's gonna be happy with her status there. And the same thing for Sunny. And as soon as they step outside, there's like a moment of quiet around both of them.
It's interesting being a woman in the world because the minute you walk out of hoping that to say, there's all sorts of things that can happen. It can be terrifying, it can be funny, it can be weird, it can be sad, it can be raunchy, it can be sexy, it can be all. You never know what to expect, and that's sort of an inherent part of being a woman. And so, like, I really wanted to infuse that house and you are a certain way for them, right? Or you rebel against the way they want you to be, but you have a certain place in that household. And then when you're at this age where you finally get to be alone sometimes, who are you then? And what do you want then? And are you happy then when you're by yourself?
There's so much music in the movie too, but it's a lot of period music. I mean, it's interesting because you also said this kind of in context about the way music and pop culture shape their lives.
Yes, absolutely. I love that you brought this up. I love music. I mean, it's a source of pride for me in this movie. I love the soundtrack and I love the score in this. It was something that I worked on with so much passion and love. And I think there's a few subtle things that I was thinking, which is that anytime that like the teenagers have control of the music, which is like at a party or whatever, they're listening to stuff that they would listen to. But you're right, the rest of the movie, the non-diegetic music that's in the movie that the audience is hearing is sort of like a big swath of music from the 70s and 90s. For example, in the car, there's only South Dakota radio, and there's only so many stations, and that's what they're listening to, right? Not only do I find the music to be very good, and stylistically, I was going for something that was a little bit older, but I think subliminally, for me, what it creates is this idea, this evergreenness that women have been living like this forever, and it's not just a now thing, it's an always thing, and I think that having music live in all these zones and still fit within this movie does that for me.
I think it's that thing that, it's the stuff they think for themselves versus the stuff that's being played around them. So I think there's a lot of sort of texture about the way the world is around them and how they live in it and how they live for themselves.
There's an oppression to being forgotten. It's this pressure and this there's nowhere for you to feel except in thank God. And that's kind of the feeling I want to create, at least in the beginning, because there's a powerlessness to feeling that way. And so you kind of take that power into your own hands and allow yourself to take up more space. Especially in a place like South Dakota, which is where this movie takes place. It is so much land and it is so much people, but if you're the only two around the entire school, the entire vicinity, there's a lot that you're just like lost in this world of light. And originally, this movie was going to be made in March of 2020, and we got shut down like everything else. And originally, the landscape of the movie was literally all snow, so it was going to be these two brown girls in a sea of white. But then, because of COVID, we had to shift everything, and we ended up making it fall of 2020, which of course there's no snow, and then everything is brown. So how we got the same feeling across without everything really being covered in white, the way that they are in the frames at the beginning of the movie, and how we take up more space in the lenses we use, and the way we saturated them is different at the beginning than it is at the end, because we really did want to feel that like hometown oppression.
It's like a break, I guess. So always taking a break to get this country, and she's talking about it. And some of those like the lost the sea of white. I want to hear more about that. Stay tuned.
Fuck.
KCRW sponsors include Searchlight Pictures, presenting Summer of Soul, the greatest festival you've ever heard. Took place in the summer of 1969. Loaded with legendary artists, the Harlem Cultural Festival was filmed and attended by 300,000 people, but the footage was never seen until now. Director Amir Thompson, a.k.a. Questlove, presents a powerful documentary around an epic event that celebrated Black music, history, culture, and fashion. In theaters and on Hulu this Friday.
Welcome back. We're talking about being lost in space with the incident where I just make your debut as director of the film. And before we go any further, now I should put you on the spot and ask you to tell the audience what your movie's about.
Well, it's about two girls who live in America's Heartland in South Dakota, and they're two teenagers, and they're best friends, and they're kind of dorky, and they have their first high school party. One of them loses their virginity, and the next morning pees out the condom. So they go to a pharmacy to get the Planned female. They go to their local pharmacy, and there are many states in the United States, South Dakota being one of them, have a conscience clause, which means that any pharmacist can deny contraception if it goes against beliefs, and so in this small town, it goes against everybody's beliefs, and so they are denied that. So they have to get one Planned Parenthood opened across the state, and so they decided to take a road trip to go get Plan B built. And I know this sounds a little bit very dramatic, but it's actually an R-rated teen comedy, like the teen comedies we all grew up with, except, you know, instead of like getting alcohol for the party or getting a girl or getting your dad's car back in time, it's getting basic health care. But all the rest of the stuff that you might expect to happen in these fun, crazy teen quest movies still happens.
Two of the things you mentioned, getting the car back in time and the alcohol, two clear parts. In fact, that cocktail they make is one of the most horrifying things I've ever seen.
Yeah, do you remember, I mean, I don't know if you did this, Elvis, but when you were like first allowed to drink, you were like, I guess it's gonna taste horrible. I guess that's what adults do. And you just like, anything that is gonna make you get drunk, you're like, fine. I've somehow decided when I was like an elder teenager in my early 20s, I'm like, Jägermeister is my drink, and I have no idea why it's so bad, because it's not at all my drink, and it made me barf several times. So yes, I did want to convey that moment of teenhood to just like, I gotta do it.
Also, that moment in teenhood where everything is slightly terrifying. I mean, there's that sort of thing of all these things that are really scary in addition to the situation in which they're trying to get solved. And I feel with John Hughes, everything is scary.
Jeez,
Beat, especially when you're away
really
from home
inconsistent.
and you're away from your hometown. It feels like it's more difficult.
I mean, like I was saying earlier, I think that's what it's like being a woman in the world. There's threats everywhere. I read somewhere that if a man wants to know what it's like being a woman in the world, they should take all the money that they have out of the bank and just walk around with it. And I thought that was so interesting. Except, you know, if someone stole your money, it would cause you as much emotional pain as all the things that they can, you know, take away from a woman. So yes, it is all scary in some sense, but it's also, I think, something that I felt a lot as a teenager that I wanted to use in this movie, and I think we all kind of did, is there comes a time when you just like kind of force yourself to be an adult because that's what you think you need to do, and you kind of do uncomfortable things or things you're not ready for because you don't want to be left behind, you don't want to feel like a little kid anymore, and those things can be scary. You kind of are like pushing yourself out of the nest in this way, and I find that it's such a sad, true thing about being a teenager. It's something that I want to explore in this. I think Luca and Sunny both do that in so many ways.
I think so too. And this idea, this thing you just said, the fact that, you know, if this were pitched 30 degrees to the left, it would be like a small scale indie melodrama. And by keeping the drama in the situation just because there are stakes involved, but by also playing it for comedy, I think it lands in a much subtler way. I mean, that scene with J.J. That's the pharmacist, you know, that could be a whole monologue from somebody who said they just move on to the next thing because they have to solve this problem.
You need the Plan B pill. You only have so much time for it to work. So you can't linger in the people who disappoint you and the situations who are disappoint you and aren't helping you. You have to move forward. And so much of being alive is that, but also so much of, again, being a woman is that, where you just have to deal with the BS that the world throws at you and you have to keep moving. And I think that was really relatable to me. It's just like, okay, fine, what's the thing? How can we figure this out, you know?
It's funny too, because you're talking about Karen Sweet also, and you're talking about all these actors getting their beats, their moments, and that's the fun of it too. That party sequence in the last third of the movie where they don't know how to get the keys back to the van, and there's a really scary guy, and they're kind of trying to avoid it. And all those things that are kind of the tropes of the teen comedy, but what makes this different is the fact that these young women are trying to figure out who they are in the moment. That gives, I think, a particular kind of robust excitement.
For me, it was always about keeping these girls in power all the time, even in scary situations, because if we're watching it from their perspective, then they are the ones that have to keep moving. They are the ones that have to figure this out and solve this. You know, they can't just sit there and let things happen to them. And that's exactly what I wanted in that season, and actually in a lot of the seasons. They are the ones that are finally figuring out they're in charge of their own lives, and they have to move forward.
But you also got such a great cast. I mean, there's Jacob Farkas, who I never see enough of, and Jay, as we mentioned, and Rachel Dratch. I mean, it's that chemistry you're talking about, creating with your two leads. Also, this for all the actors who come in and just see the relish they have for tackling these roles.
Edie Patterson and Moses Storm are some like other big fun kind of guest stars in this movie that the girls meet, and they're so incredible, and they all have these like standout scenes that are like these amazing moments that are improvised a lot of, and also just nailing what we had with the character, and all of us in the background trying not to laugh and then mess up the scene. I mean, as an actor, it was so fun to work with actors that are so talented, and I can just let them run free with people who are that talented and care so much about the movie and about what they're doing. My job is just to keep them on grounded and honest, and guide them in a way, but then I just like let them run free because they're so incredible.
The movie does such a great job reminding us the worst thing you could do as a teen is to disappoint somebody who means something to you, both your parents and your best friend, and that becomes like a really big thematic element in the last 10 minutes of the movie.
That's the thing, and not only as a teen, I mean, it's the worst thing you can do, I feel, as an adult through the rest of your life. I mean, I did make this movie for teenagers for sure, but I also made it for people who used to be teenagers and needed this movie, and because I think it's a common thing that we kind of never let go of, and I wanted people to know, if there is any message in this movie, which I sort of tried for it not to feel that way, because I just what it's like to be alive as a person in this world. I didn't want to hit you over the head with anything, and I didn't want to preach at anybody. But if there is anything, any message in this movie, is that you deserve love and you deserve acceptance, no matter if you make mistakes, who you are, and that like I wanted to give people an example of like what a best friend should look like, and especially young teenagers, and what a love interest should look like and be like and sound like, you know, and what parents could be like. That was sort of my only subversive goal among many, but that was the most important.
Hello.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Just for the culvert that's going to drain I'm going to make a little later on in the build. And I just pull that away, and then with a bunch of rough chunks of XPS, do a little brainstorming here and just kind of feel my way through this. So I'm just using XPS foam to block out the rough structure of the base of the building. This part is going to be concrete when it's finished, and XPS foam is a good way of getting that sort of featureless walls that concrete makes. So once I have my pieces roughly cut into place, I do a quick mock-up without any glue. And that's about the shape I'm going for. So when I'm satisfied with that, I'm going to cut another piece and make that culvert into something that leads into the structure a little bit more. So when you peer into it, you can see it sort of curving off, and it's not going to have much detail back there. Details add a lot when the thing comes together. Gorilla Glue construction adhesive to glue all the foam together. I've been talking a lot about this recently if you watched any of my previous videos, but this stuff is amazing. This stuff bonds foam extremely well. It's very tacky right off the bat without having to clamp anything, because the lightweight nature of the foam and the tackiness of the Gorilla Glue really makes it an easy workflow. So here I'm using that piece of culvert, and I'm doing what I described a moment ago, which is I'm cutting the pieces on an angle and sort of curving them off to the left. Now, this is not very precise, as you can see, and I'm just holding it together with some more of that brown tape, but it's going to be just fine. It's, again, one of those pieces that you're not going to really see, so sometimes you got to cut corners here and there if you want to save a little bit of time, you know what I'm saying? So that's all I'm doing there. It's just kind of cobbling that together, save a little bit of time, but end up with something that is a nice little detail still. There you go, you can see. It's not perfectly smooth on the inside, but who says it has to be? What, are you a culvert expert? I'm not, that's for sure. And besides, this is the underhive. Things are a little bit more ramshackle. So next, I'm going to keep adding some other pieces of foam to build out more structure. Right now, I'm just kind of composing the basic shapes of the structure. I'm trying to get a nice building block, an interesting shape to build on, really. And this is kind of a process that's totally improvisational. I did do a sketch to plan it out, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of trial and error here. There's a lot of cutting pieces, holding them up, see how they look, cutting pieces of foam core, making some shapes. As you can see here, I'm cutting the foam core on a bevel on an angle to get a nice corner piece. And that allows me to make a nice boxy shape. And I make a lot of sort of just boxy shapes like this and hold them up on the structure and see where they're going to look good. And once I'm satisfied with them, I can trace out some chipboard to make a base, and that'll give them some rigidity and also a bottom. And I just build that way, really, improvisationally, cutting, trimming, use a bit of hot glue to glue the foam core structure on. And that's essentially my method for building these basic shapes. Now, these foam core pieces are going to be the actual shanty houses themselves. And you'll see why in a moment when I start cutting into them. But generally speaking, I use the pink XPS foam for concrete and the foam core for the shanty houses themselves. Here I'm using a little piece of granny grating, which is a knitting mesh that you can get at an arts and crafts store. And I'm just test fitting for a little grate for the culvert. And the reason why is I want a little bit of detail, I want a nice rusty grate in there, and I want to further obscure your ability to look down into that tunnel there to kind of hide that there's not much to look at in there. But so I cut out basically some of the extra links, and that allowed me to get a coarser grid than that distinctive granny grating look. You know, granny grating is a great material, but once you've been crafting with it for a while, your eye can pick it up pretty easily. So this modification is something that I've done in the past that makes it less instantly recognizable, and I'm a little bit happier with that. So there's that grid. Pretty happy with how that's looking. Now with this basic shape done, I'm going to take my Gorilla Glue and I'm going to put it all around the perimeter. Be careful to make a nice seal, and I'm going to glue that to a piece of chipboard. I put quite a lot of weight on there to try to flatten it down because the piece of chipboard was a little bit warped, which is annoying, but these things happen. And so I'm just going to pile some heavy stuff on there to hold it down. Like that's like, a coffee grinder and a bag of glue sticks. You got to work with what you got. So next I'm going to cut off the excess chipboard from around the structure, and there you go, like a nice invisible base. And the piece is nicely fitting onto that piece of chipboard. There are a lot of custom pieces of chipboard that I cut and glue and onto existing shapes, and that's just kind of done on an improvisational basis as well. Just kind of measuring, eyeballing, trial, error. Here's a good example of why you need a dual temperature glue gun. The glue was way too hot when I put this down, and you can see it melted into the foam and didn't actually bond very well. So I'm switching my glue gun to low, and while that cools down a little bit, I'm going to take an opportunity to dump some acrylic black paint into the back of that structure while the top is still open, and paint it black in there. It'll be really difficult to paint in there once this thing's put together, and this will just help you to have that Stygian blackness if you look down into the culvert. Nice. Okay, so with a little low temperature hot glue, I'm able to glue that nice block on there, which is on a jaunty angle because I want to have this staircase reaching over from this lower level up to that level there. Now the stairs I'm using are O-scale styrene stairs, a Plastruct. I'll put a link in the description. These are really great. They're a model railroad kit, and I find the scale is just perfect for the 28-32 millimeter Warhammer Necromunda scale. So I really like these stairs. I got a whole bunch of them for this build, and they're a crucial component of it. So check out the link in the description if you want some. Here you can see I'm adding more little areas where the stairs can go on. I really wanted this piece to feel like there were stairs going all over it, like an MC Escher drawing or something. Normally I use a lot of ladders when I'm building, but since this is supposed to be a residential structure, like realistically, I mean, even though this is the dark future, people still have to like carry bags of groceries and stuff, presumably. I mean, I don't know, maybe they have nutrient slurry paste piped directly into their homes, but I figured stairs is more appropriate for residential than ladders in any case. So even though there might be ruder slums that have just ladders, I'm happy to have just stairs on this build, and it adds really a cool appearance as well. So here you can see I'm adding a box that I fabricated as a completely enclosed box. And I'm putting that on the edge there with the staircase running along the side of it to the top of it. And then I'm going to close that in with another prefabricated box. And what that's going to do is create a really cool negative space under the stairs in between these two shanty structures. And that's like an area that there'd be like some rats or something. That's the fun part about improvising these, is you get these fun little moments picking up. I'm cutting that with my hobby saw, and that's just add another little structure. Now add a short length of pipe coming out of the central pipe. There's going to be a little waterfall down into the pool below. You'll see. Add a little bit of cereal box around the outside to just give it more of a pipe-like cladding at the end of it. Here's a tiny little window box type thing that adds a nice landing for the stairs. As you can see, this is kind of my process as I build. I squint at them, I beat my head against the wall, I hold them up in a different pattern, and it goes pretty slowly, to be honest, but I think the juice is worth the squeeze, because you end up with some really cool shapes when it's all said and done. Here you can see I've added another structure on the roof with those other two, and this I'm happy with that, because that's going to be a cool little dark alley when we're all done. Now here's a method for making walkways that I've shown in some previous videos. I add some sculptor's mesh and super glue it to this little toy here. These toys are called Ruminate, and they are a dollhouse building tool. I guess like build your own dollhouse, you buy some more, because I really like the way they work as these little platforms. But as you can see, they make nice little landings for when the platforms cantilever past of the interior stairs going under the structures, and these platforms stretching over spans, I think creates a really cool dynamic for this piece. And I'm really happy with how that turned out. So here's a little I-beam that I made out of pieces of chipboard, just 3 pieces of chipboard of equal length glued together in an I pattern. And now I'm adding some plastic pipes. These are just another cheap child's building toy that I'll put a link for in the description. You get a huge bag of these for like $8, and they're pretty awesome. And as you can see, these make some nice industrial-looking pipes that sort of tie this in with the rest of the underhide set. T joints and actually like X joints that I never use because I'm no plumber. Joints is very common, but that's neither here nor there. As you can see, we are nearing the top of the structure. I made this piece exactly 12 inches tall, and I'm going to do another top. And the reason for that is because I want you to stack other structures on top of this eventually. I'd love to have this continue up in a further build, or add, a existing piece on top of there, maybe a Games Workshop kit, some sort of industrial looking piece of machinery. The sky's the limit, really. But here I'm using a little bit of pre-made spackle and filling in some of the gaps on my concrete pieces. This is just a nice way to unify those pieces of foam so it looks less like it's glued together bits of foam and looks a little bit more like it's poured concrete.
Oh, God.
Now I'm making a bunch of doors. My preferred dimension for doors is 1 inch by 1.5 inch, which is not exactly the...
All right. Well, I'm going to take a pause there.